Ma'am, stop right there because you're not checking out until I figure out what you're trying to pull. I've been watching you since you walked in and something isn't adding up. Don't give me that calm face, I've seen that look before. You think staying quiet will get you past me? Not happening today. You're not moving until I say this transaction is cleared. The words snapped through the checkout lane like a command, sharp and echoing. Linda Crane, a 47-year-old cashier known for her tight control and self-assured tone, stood behind the counter with a raised hand, pointing toward the woman in front of her. Her voice carried the edge of someone convinced she was in charge and determined to prove it. Naomi Caldwell, a 38-year-old graceful woman with tired eyes and the quiet poise of someone who'd seen far worse than public rudeness, simply held her basket. She didn't move. She didn't flinch. Her uniform was neatly pressed, her ID badge clipped discreetly inside her coat pocket after a long night shift. The only thing she carried was calm, and that calm seemed to make Linda even angrier. I said, I need to see what you're doing with that lane, Linda barked. This one's for priority customers, elderly, first responders, store members. Not random walk-ins. You people always try to sneak in because you think no one will say anything. Naomi's lips parted slightly, her voice steady. I'm just here to buy a few things before heading home. I used the lane that said quick checkout. Linda folded her arms. That lane isn't for everyone. It's for people who belong here. Now either you step aside or I'll call security. Naomi stayed silent. Her breathing was measured, her hands still on the basket handle. The woman behind her shifted uncomfortably, whispering something Naomi couldn't catch. The air in the aisle thickened with unease. People watched, but no one spoke up. They didn't have to, the silence was already loud enough. Raymond Ellis, a 29-year-old customer holding a basket of groceries, stood a few feet away watching the exchange. He felt the sting of it deep in his chest but couldn't find the words to step in. His throat tightened, his conscience pricked, but he stayed still, caught between wanting to help and fearing the scene that would follow. Ma'am, I'm warning you, Linda pressed, her voice rising. You can't just play innocent and expect to get away with it. I've seen your type. Naomi blinked once, slow and deliberate. My type? She repeated softly, almost like she was clarifying a term in a meeting. Linda leaned forward, lowering her tone but not her hostility. You know exactly what I mean. Always think the rules don't apply to you. The checkout beeped faintly as another cashier processed items nearby, but all focus stayed here, between the accusing finger and the woman who refused to bow her head. Naomi's calm wasn't arrogance. It was something deeper. A quiet power that didn't need to shout. What would you do in this moment? Would you speak up or stay silent like the others? Comment below if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with the same respect, no matter what they look like. And if you believe dignity should never depend on someone's bias, hit subscribe and keep listening. Because this was only the beginning. Naomi didn't move when the silence thickened. The air inside the supermarket felt like it had paused in disapproval, waiting to see what she would do next. The hum of the ceiling lights trembled faintly, a mechanical reminder that time was still moving even though everyone around them seemed frozen in place. She kept her posture straight, her voice calm and her eyes steady. If you're finished accusing me, she said softly, I'd like to pay and go home. Her words weren't defensive, they were simply factual. That alone seemed to infuriate Linda even more. The cashier leaned forward slightly, her lips tightening, her tone sharp enough to slice through the uneasy quiet. Oh, that's rich, she said with a bitter laugh. You think you can just talk your way through this? I bet you play that calm card everywhere you go, don't you? Well, not here. Not while I'm on shift. Naomi exhaled slowly through her nose, holding on to her patience like it was a fragile thread that might break if tugged too hard. Around them, the other customers had fallen into a strange kind of stillness. Nobody looked directly at her, but everyone was watching. The woman in the next lane shifted her groceries from one arm to the other, pretending to scroll through her phone while her eyes darted toward Naomi every few seconds. The man behind her cleared his throat, restless but unwilling to say anything. The tension was like a weight pressing on everyone's chest. Raymond Ellis, a 29-year-old customer with unassuming brown hair and the uncertain look of someone used to avoiding confrontation, stood near the magazine rack holding a basket of milk, cereal, and a few ready meals. He wasn't sure what to do. His stomach twisted with guilt as he realized exactly what he was seeing: bias, open and unashamed, parading itself as procedure. But he hesitated, convincing himself that saying something might make things worse. It was the same excuse he'd used 100 times before when witnessing unfairness he didn't know how to stop. Naomi turned her head slightly toward him, sensing his stare. She didn't ask for help. She didn't need it. That, somehow, made him feel even smaller. From the far end of the aisle, a calm, firm voice spoke up. "Linda," the woman said, stepping forward. "Maybe you should just scan her items. She's done nothing wrong." It was Michelle Adebayo, a 41-year-old nurse consultant who'd stopped by for lunch supplies on her day off. Her hospital ID still hung loosely around her neck, though she didn't flaunt it. There was strength in her tone, the kind of quiet authority that comes from years of advocating for others. Michelle had seen this dynamic before: the imbalance of tone, the coded language, the performance of power, and she wasn't about to ignore it. Linda turned, bristling. "Excuse me, Michelle, I don't need a lecture on how to do my job. I've been here 10 years and I can tell when something's off." "Off," Michelle repeated. "You're stopping a woman from paying for her groceries." Linda's jaw tightened. "You don't understand. There are policies for these lanes. This one's for members and essential personnel." "I am essential personnel," Naomi said evenly. Her tone was measured, not confrontational. "But even if I weren't, there's nothing here that says others can't use it." Linda folded her arms, eyes narrowing. "You people always think you can bend the rules when it suits you. I don't care what excuse you've come up with this time." Naomi blinked once, slow and deliberate, then spoke in a voice calm enough to make her opponent's bluster sound childish. "You people?" she asked. The phrase hung in the air, bare and exposed. "I'd like you to clarify that." Linda's face stiffened. She didn't answer. Instead, she gestured toward Naomi's chest. "Why's your ID turned around? Most honest people don't hide who they are." Naomi looked down at the small badge tucked discreetly inside her coat. "Because I came straight here from work," she said quietly. "After a night shift. I'd prefer not to be disturbed." "Sure," Linda said with a dry smirk. "Sounds convenient. I could call the manager, but I already know how that goes. People like you always play the victim when someone enforces a rule." That line, those words, made the silence grow unbearable. Naomi's fingers tightened around the handle of her basket, her knuckles whitening for just a second before she relaxed her grip again. She looked Linda directly in the eyes. "Enforcing a rule and enforcing prejudice," she said, "are not the same thing." Linda's posture faltered. Just slightly. The words had landed somewhere she hadn't expected, to be called out with such calm, deliberate composure. Around them, even the customers who'd been pretending not to listen now watched openly. One woman's mouth was slightly open in disbelief. A man a few aisles away shook his head, muttering something to his companion. The sense of shame was spreading, and it wasn't Naomi who wore it. Michelle stepped closer, her expression unreadable but her voice carrying weight. "Linda, that's enough." Linda's eyes flashed, desperate to reclaim control. If it's enough, then she can show her ID and prove she belongs here. Naomi didn't move. "I don't have to prove my belonging to you." For a long moment, no one spoke. The store seemed to breathe in one collective inhale, every customer holding still as if waiting for permission to move again. Then, at the far end of the store, the automatic doors hissed open. Two men in tailored suits walked in, their polished shoes clicking against the floor. They looked out of place among the shopping carts and cereal boxes, but they walked with purpose, scanning the aisles until one of them spotted Naomi. "There she is," the first man said, relief in his tone. "Dr. Caldwell, we've been trying to reach you all morning." Heads turned instantly. Naomi lifted her gaze, calm as ever. The second man grinned broadly as he approached. "Congratulations again, doctor. The board is thrilled about your appointment. The hospital is lucky to have you as our new director." The word director hit the air like a thunderclap. Every conversation, every small noise stopped. Even the hum of the lights seemed quieter. Linda's face drained of color. The smugness that had held her expression together vanished, replaced by confusion and a dawning horror. Her hand fell from its accusatory point, trembling slightly as the realization took root. She wasn't just humiliating a customer, she was humiliating the new director of the very hospital that kept their community running. Naomi didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She simply offered a polite smile to the two men. "Thank you," she said. "I was just finishing up here." The men nodded respectfully, their tone deferential now. "We'll wait by the entrance. There are a few papers we'd like you to review before the press release this afternoon." "Of course," Naomi said. As they stepped away, the entire store seemed to exhale. The tension snapped. Raymond, standing frozen near the magazines, felt shame burn at the back of his neck. He had watched it all happen, the suspicion, the humiliation, the quiet restraint, and done nothing. Now the truth sat in front of him like a mirror reflecting his own silence. Linda stammered, "Dr. Caldwell, I didn't." Naomi's voice was soft but unyielding. "You did," she said. "You assumed. You decided who I was before you even spoke to me." "I didn't mean," Linda began. "Yes," Naomi interrupted gently, "you did. And that's the part that hurts the most. You meant every word until you realized who I am. But who I am shouldn't change how you treat me." Michelle stepped beside Naomi, her arms crossed, watching the cashier struggle to form an apology that wouldn't come. There was no defense left that could erase what everyone had just seen. Naomi finally picked up her basket and placed it gently on the counter. "Go ahead and scan them," she said. "You said this lane was for essential personnel, didn't you?" Linda's hand shook slightly as she reached for the scanner. The beeping sounded louder now, echoing through the store like a reminder of everything that had just unfolded. When she was done, Naomi paid in silence and collected her bag. Before she turned to leave, she looked at Raymond, who met her gaze for only a second. His lips parted as if to say "I'm sorry," but no words came out. Naomi gave him a brief, understanding nod and walked toward the doors where the board members waited. Michelle followed a few steps behind, stopping briefly at the register. "Linda," she said quietly, "I hope you think about what you've just done. Because everyone else will." As the automatic doors slid open again and Naomi stepped out into the sunlight, the entire store remained in stunned quiet. Every witness, every bystander, every silent participant was left to reckon with what they'd just seen, how easily dignity could be dismissed, and how suddenly it could rise again with unshakable grace. If you believe that respect should never depend on status, and that fairness should be shown to everyone before their titles are known, share what equality means to you. And if you believe silence protects no one, hit subscribe, because this story is far from over. Naomi stepped outside the automatic doors and felt the cool morning air brush against her skin. The brightness of the parking lot contrasted sharply with the tension she had just left behind. She didn't rush to her car. Instead, she stood still for a moment, letting the calm settle back into her breathing. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from the weight of restraint, the kind of strength that comes from choosing dignity over outrage. Behind the glass doors, Linda still stood frozen at her register. The line had dissolved. Shoppers whispered among themselves, replaying the moment in their heads. No one wanted to admit what they'd witnessed, but everyone knew it was something they wouldn't forget. Michelle followed Naomi outside, her steps brisk, her concern clear. "Dr. Caldwell," she called softly. "Are you all right?" Naomi turned, her expression warm but distant. "I'm fine, Michelle. Thank you for speaking up in there." Michelle frowned. "I should have done more." "You did enough," Naomi said gently. "You did what most people wouldn't." The two women stood beside a row of carts, the morning sun catching on the chrome metal. For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of cars pulling in and out filled the air, ordinary life continuing as if the world hadn't just seen a quiet act of courage unfold inside a grocery store. Then a hesitant voice broke the silence behind them. "Dr. Caldwell?" Naomi turned. Raymond Ellis approached slowly, holding his grocery bag awkwardly in both hands. His face carried a mixture of guilt and respect. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," he said, "for standing there. For not saying anything when I should have." Naomi studied him for a moment, her gaze steady but not harsh. "It's not easy to speak up," she said. "Most people wait for someone else to take the first step." "I saw how she treated you," Raymond said quietly. "I kept thinking it's not my business. But it was. I just didn't want to get involved." Naomi gave a small, understanding smile. "You've already learned something important. The next time you see someone being diminished, don't look away. You don't need permission to do what's right." Raymond nodded, his throat tight. "I won't forget that." Before he could say more, one of the board members called from across the parking lot. "Dr. Caldwell. The press team's waiting for your statement. They're setting up at the hospital entrance." Naomi nodded politely, then turned back to Raymond. "Take care of yourself," she said, her tone calm but weighted with meaning. "And take care of others when it matters most." He watched as she walked away, her posture unshaken, her composure unbroken. It struck him that true power didn't always shout. It often walked away quietly, leaving others changed by its grace. Inside the store, Linda's humiliation deepened. Her manager, having seen the incident replayed on the security feed, approached with a clipboard and a look that carried both disappointment and finality. The store had already received 2 calls, one from a hospital board representative, another from a local journalist who'd been told what happened. "Linda," the manager said carefully, "we need to talk." Her lips trembled. "I didn't know who she was." "That's not the point," the manager replied. "You didn't need to know who she was to treat her with respect." The words hit her harder than any reprimand could. Around her, employees avoided her gaze, some shaking their heads, others whispering that it was only a matter of time. The humiliation wasn't public rage, it was quiet accountability, and it was far more lasting. By that afternoon, the story had spread across town. Not because of outrage or spectacle, but because people couldn't stop talking about the calm way Naomi had handled injustice. The incident became a conversation starter about bias, dignity, and power, the way a single encounter could reveal so much about a society's heart. At the hospital later that day, Naomi stood at the entrance with reporters and staff gathered around. Cameras clicked as she addressed the crowd. Her voice, still calm and measured, carried the weight of truth. "What happened this morning wasn't unique," she began. "It happens every day, to people who don't have cameras watching, to people who don't have titles to protect them." I didn't respond with anger because anger would have distracted from the truth. The truth is simple. Every person deserves respect before their name, before their job, before their skin color. The crowd was silent. Even those who had come for a headline listened with genuine reflection. "I hope what happened today reminds us all that respect shouldn't be conditional," Naomi continued. "It shouldn't depend on appearances or assumptions. It should be given freely because that's what humanity demands." Michelle, standing nearby, felt tears sting her eyes. Raymond, who had come to the hospital after seeing the local post about the incident, listened from the back of the crowd, realizing how deeply one encounter could change a person. When Naomi finished, applause broke out, not loud but steady and sincere. It wasn't the sound of celebration. It was the sound of people who had been reminded of what decency really means. Later that evening, as Naomi finally sat in her office overlooking the city, she opened a message from Michelle. "You turned a moment of hate into a lesson in grace." Naomi smiled faintly. It wasn't about grace, it was about truth. About holding on to dignity when others tried to strip it away. Back at the supermarket, Linda packed her things into a small box. Her manager didn't look angry anymore, just tired. "Take some time to think about what respect really means," he said quietly before walking away. Linda sat there for a long time, staring at her reflection in the small screen of the register that once gave her a sense of control. For the first time, she saw what others had seen, a woman blinded by her own assumptions. The weight of that realization would follow her long after the job was gone. Naomi's words, replayed in her mind, became the echo she couldn't escape. "Who I am shouldn't change how you treat me." Outside, the sky shifted to a deep amber, the day closing quietly. Naomi's car pulled from the parking lot of the hospital, her headlights cutting a soft path through the evening. She didn't think about Linda anymore. She thought about Raymond, about Michelle, about every silent witness who might remember and do better next time. If you believe respect shouldn't wait until someone's title is known, if you believe dignity belongs to everyone, leave your thoughts below. And if stories like this remind you that silence can be broken, hit subscribe because the fight for justice doesn't end with one voice. It begins when more of us start using ours. Naomi woke early the next morning, long before the sun had fully risen. The memory of the previous day hovered in her mind, not as bitterness, but as a quiet reminder of what still needed to change. She brewed a cup of coffee and stood by her window, watching the city slowly stir to life. The streets glowed faintly under the morning haze, a mix of tired headlights and distant bus engines. She thought of Linda. She thought of Raymond. And she thought of every person who'd stayed silent that morning, not because they agreed, but because they didn't know how to speak. That silence was what hurt the most. Not the insult, not the accusation, but the stillness of people who could have made it stop sooner. By the time Naomi arrived at the hospital, the lobby was busier than usual. Staff whispered, nurses paused mid-conversation, and even patients glanced her way with subtle recognition. The story had spread further than she'd imagined. Someone had recorded part of the confrontation on their phone. It had made its way online, first as a local clip, then as a viral discussion about prejudice and professionalism. Naomi wasn't proud of the attention. She hadn't wanted fame. She wanted reflection. And maybe, just maybe, change. As she walked through the corridor, Michelle caught up beside her, holding a folder of documents. "Morning, Dr. Caldwell," she said, smiling. "They're already setting up for the community forum. Looks like you've got a full audience." Naomi nodded. "I expected as much. I just hoped they came to listen." "They did," Michelle said. "People are ready for truth, they just need someone brave enough to say it." In the conference hall, chairs were lined in neat rows. The local press was there again, but this time their cameras weren't hunting for drama. They were waiting for leadership. On the projector screen behind Naomi's podium, the title read, "Breaking the Bias, Respect in Every Interaction." When she began to speak, her tone was steady, personal, and real. "Yesterday," she said, "I was reminded how easy it is for bias to hide behind policy. A rule can look fair on paper, but how we enforce it reveals what's inside our hearts." The room was silent. "I've spent 15 years working in hospitals," she continued. "I've treated strangers who became friends and friends who became family. But before any of them knew my title, before any of them trusted my care, I was just a face to be judged. And yesterday I was judged again." Naomi paused, her voice softening. "What happened in that store wasn't the first time. It won't be the last. But what matters isn't how I was treated, it's how we, as a community, choose to treat one another after seeing it happen." Her eyes found Raymond in the second row. He had come, quietly sitting near the back at first until she motioned him forward. His hands were clasped together, and his expression carried the weight of self-reflection. She looked at him directly as she said, "Sometimes doing the right thing isn't about shouting the loudest. It's about finding the courage to say, 'That's not okay,' when everyone else stays quiet." Raymond lowered his head slightly, humbled. Naomi turned back to the audience. "I've heard people say they don't see color. But I don't want you to ignore it. I want you to respect it. Because ignoring it means pretending we're all treated the same, and we're not. Equality isn't pretending differences don't exist. It's treating every difference with dignity." The room filled with thoughtful silence. A few people wiped at their eyes. The words didn't sound rehearsed, they sounded lived. In another corner of the hall, Linda sat near the back, shoulders hunched, her store uniform replaced by a plain gray cardigan. She had come quietly, unsure if she'd even be allowed in. No one recognized her at first, but Naomi did. Their eyes met briefly. Naomi didn't flinch, didn't harden. She simply acknowledged her with a nod, a small, forgiving gesture that said more than anger ever could. When the speech ended, the audience rose in applause. It wasn't thunderous, but it was sincere, a standing wave of gratitude. Reporters approached with microphones, but Naomi politely declined interviews. She wasn't there for headlines. She was there for healing. Afterward, as people filtered out, Linda approached slowly. "Dr. Caldwell," she began, her voice small, raw. I came to apologize. Not because I lost my job, but because I finally saw the video. I didn't like the person I saw in it. Naomi listened quietly. I grew up believing I treated everyone fairly, Linda continued. But yesterday I realized fairness means nothing if it disappears the moment you feel uncomfortable. I can't take back what I did, but I can learn from it. Naomi nodded gently. Acknowledging it is the first step. Change comes after humility. Linda's eyes welled with tears. Thank you for not humiliating me in return. There's no need, Naomi said softly. Humiliation doesn't heal. Understanding does. They stood in silence for a long moment. Then Linda stepped back, her shoulders lighter somehow, as though she just set down something heavy she'd been carrying for years. Outside, Raymond approached Michelle. I still think about that moment in the store, he admitted. How I just stood there. Michelle smiled. Then don't forget it. Regret's not a punishment, it's a lesson. You're not supposed to carry it. You're supposed to grow from it. He nodded, a little more certain this time. That night, Naomi returned home to a quiet apartment. The city lights shimmered beyond her window like 1,000 silent witnesses. She thought about the people who'd heard her speak, about the new conversations beginning to spark in homes and workplaces across town. She thought about Linda's trembling apology, about Raymond's awakening, about the countless others who'd watched the video and see themselves in it, either as the victim, the bystander, or the one who needed to change. She smiled faintly. Real progress, she knew, never happened in crowds. It started one heart at a time. As she turned off the light, her reflection in the window caught the faint glow of the skyline behind her. Her voice lingered in her mind, the same words she'd shared with everyone earlier. Respect isn't something you earn by title or uniform. It's what you give because it's the right thing to do. If you believe in that truth, if you believe kindness is a strength, not a weakness, share this story. Let others know that justice begins in the moments no one else sees. And if you believe dignity must be defended every single day, hit subscribe and stand with those who choose empathy over ego. The next morning arrived with a pale stillness that settled softly over the city. Naomi sat in her office at the hospital, papers spread neatly across her desk, but her mind was far away from the ink and numbers before her. The sunlight slanted through the window, falling across a framed photograph of her medical team, a reminder of the people who depended on her leadership and faith. Her phone buzzed. A message from the hospital's public relations director read, "The video has reached national media. They're asking for your permission to release an official statement." Naomi sighed quietly, setting the phone down. She hadn't sought attention, she had sought peace. Yet now, her composure had become a symbol of resilience, something people around the country were talking about. Michelle entered a few minutes later, her expression carrying both pride and fatigue. "Dr. Caldwell, they're ready for you in the auditorium. The city council and several community leaders are waiting." Naomi looked up, her tone soft but firm. "Let's go then." As they walked through the halls, nurses greeted her with nods of quiet admiration. Some had tears in their eyes. Others simply smiled, small, silent acknowledgments of what her grace had meant to them. The hospital's auditorium was packed. City officials, journalists, students, and everyday citizens filled the seats. The incident had ignited a movement, and people were ready to confront uncomfortable truths. Naomi took the stage not as a symbol, but as a woman who had endured and chosen to respond with integrity. "Thank you for being here," she began, her voice calm yet powerful. "What happened a few days ago wasn't just about a misunderstanding in a grocery store. It was about something much larger, a reflection of the quiet divides that still exist among us." She paused, letting the weight of that statement settle. When we allow prejudice to shape our reactions, we strip away the humanity of others, and in doing so we lose a part of our own. A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd. "I've been asked many times why I didn't get angry," Naomi continued. "The truth is, anger was there. But anger without direction becomes destruction. I chose restraint because I wanted the lesson to be seen, not buried under rage. But that doesn't mean silence. Silence enables injustice. Restraint, however, can expose it. She looked across the crowd, her gaze settling on Raymond, who sat near the front this time. His eyes were fixed on her, his face open and remorseful but also stronger. She smiled briefly before continuing. There were people who watched what happened that day, people who said nothing. I don't hold that against them. I only hope they remember that every silence during injustice is a choice. And when enough of us choose silence, the harm continues. Raymond's throat tightened. He knew those words were for him, and yet they weren't meant to wound. They were an invitation to do better. From the back of the room, Linda sat beside a community outreach volunteer, her eyes glassy. She had spent the past few days volunteering at a food pantry, seeking to understand rather than defend. She hadn't come to be forgiven, she came to listen. Naomi went on. I've been privileged to serve as a doctor and now as a director, but titles don't make anyone worthy of respect. Humanity does. The woman at the register that morning didn't know who I was. But that's exactly the point. I shouldn't have needed to be someone for her to show kindness. The crowd was completely silent. Even the soft hum of cameras clicking seemed distant, reverent. She took a slow breath and continued, her voice lower now, intimate. What would our world look like if respect came first? Before judgment. Before suspicion. Before assumption. How many lives could change if we saw each other as human before anything else? There was a stillness, then applause, long, heartfelt, rising like a wave that filled the room. Naomi stood quietly, accepting it not as praise but as acknowledgement of shared truth. When the crowd dispersed, Naomi found herself standing near the exit as people approached to shake her hand. Raymond came first. Dr. Caldwell, he said, his voice steady. I've joined a local advocacy group. We're organizing workshops on bias awareness. I just wanted to thank you for giving me the courage to start. Naomi smiled warmly. That's the real reward, she said. Change that grows from understanding. Next came Linda. She hesitated before speaking, her hands clasped tightly. Dr. Caldwell, I wanted you to know I've been accepted into a diversity and inclusion training program. I want to do the work to change, not just say sorry. Naomi reached out, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. That's good, Linda. True change isn't about guilt. It's about growth. Keep going. Linda nodded, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Later that evening, Naomi returned home and stepped out onto her balcony. The city lights shimmered like distant stars, quiet and watchful. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain. She closed her eyes and listened to the city breathe. She thought of every person who had messaged her since the story went public. Young nurses inspired by her calm, workers who saw themselves in her struggle, strangers who'd written that they finally understood how everyday prejudice still wounds. The world was watching her now, but that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was that they were listening. She whispered to herself, maybe that's how justice begins, not with noise but with understanding. Then, as if answering her own thought, she smiled faintly. And understanding grows when we refuse to mirror the cruelty shown to us. The next morning, Naomi received a letter on her desk. It was from Raymond. Inside it read, Dr. Caldwell. Yesterday you changed the way I see people. I used to believe silence meant peace. Now I know silence means permission. I promise I'll never stay quiet again. Thank you for showing us what strength looks like. Naomi folded the letter carefully and placed it in her drawer. She didn't need awards or headlines. The real victory was in the change she saw around her, in the eyes of the people who now understood that respect wasn't optional. Outside, the city continued to move, loud and restless. But somewhere beneath that noise, small acts of courage were beginning to take root. People were watching differently, speaking differently, thinking differently. And Naomi Caldwell, a 38-year-old woman once underestimated in a grocery store line, had quietly sparked something powerful, not through anger but through unwavering grace. If you believe the world needs more of that kind of strength, the kind that stays calm when others lose control, share this story. Let it remind someone that justice begins with how we treat the person standing right in front of us. And if you believe respect is the foundation of every true change, hit subscribe and stand for it wherever you are. The morning light filtered through Naomi's office window like a soft promise. It had been a week since the incident, yet its impact rippled quietly through every conversation, every headline, every heart that had been touched by it. She had become, unintentionally, a symbol of something far greater than herself, a reminder that grace could disarm hatred more powerfully than rage ever could. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from the hospital board. Asterisk community response has been overwhelming. Local schools and organizations are requesting your presence for equality seminars. Asterisk Naomi smiled faintly. The world was beginning to move differently, not fast, not perfectly, but forward. Later that afternoon she met Michelle in the hospital courtyard. The air carried the scent of fresh rain on pavement, and the chatter of nurses floated in the distance. Michelle handed her a newspaper, folded open to an article titled Calm Under Fire, the director who turned prejudice into progress. Naomi skimmed it briefly, shaking her head. They make it sound like I did something extraordinary, she said softly. But I only did what everyone should be doing. Michelle smiled. That's exactly why it's extraordinary. Because not everyone does. They sat together on a bench beneath a tree, the leaves dripping slowly from the morning drizzle. For a few moments neither spoke. The silence wasn't heavy this time, it was peaceful, earned. After a while, Naomi said, when I was younger, I used to think that changing the world meant standing in the spotlight. I thought you had to be loud to be heard. She glanced upward, the sky still gray but open. Now I see it differently. Real change happens in the quiet choices, the ones no one sees. Michelle nodded thoughtfully. Like the choice you made in that store. Naomi gave a faint, knowing smile. Yes. The choice not to become what tried to break me. A small group of nursing students passed by, whispering greetings and smiles of admiration. Naomi returned their greetings warmly. They had been children when bias first bruised them, yet now they walked into a world slightly fairer because of her restraint. That thought gave her peace. As evening approached, Naomi attended a televised community discussion hosted at a local university. The event was called Moments That Move Us Forward. She was joined by speakers from different walks of life, educators, civil rights advocates, even store managers who had started new inclusion programs in response to her story. The moderator turned to Naomi halfway through. Dr. Caldwell, she asked, if you could tell the nation one thing about what happened, what would it be? Naomi looked directly into the camera, her voice firm and measured. That dignity is not negotiable. You don't grant it to someone because of who they are, you give it because of who you are. The audience erupted in applause, but Naomi didn't smile for the cameras. She smiled for the people watching at home, for those who'd been disrespected, dismissed, or doubted. She wanted them to know that silence didn't mean surrender, and calm didn't mean weakness. After the broadcast, Naomi lingered on the stage for a moment, watching people file out. Linda approached quietly from the side, dressed simply, no cameras, no press. She had been volunteering at the hospital's outreach center all week, quietly rebuilding the trust she'd broken. Dr. Caldwell, she said, voice low, I just wanted to thank you for not letting my mistake end my story. I've learned more about myself in 1 week than I did in 47 years. Naomi's expression was soft. Then you've already begun the real work, she said. Keep walking that road. Change isn't about who you were, it's about who you decide to be next. Linda nodded, her eyes glistening, and walked away quietly. Later that night, Naomi sat in her car before driving home. The world outside shimmered with city lights, reflections of possibility. She thought about how easily that moment in the grocery store could have turned into something ugly, something irreversible. Instead, it became something living, a movement, a mirror, a message. Her phone chimed again. It was a video message sent by Raymond. In it, he stood in front of a small classroom of community volunteers. We're starting weekly discussions on unconscious bias, he said. Your story inspired this, Dr. Caldwell. Thank you for giving silence a voice. Naomi pressed play again, smiling at his sincerity. She didn't reply immediately, she didn't need to. Some things were better left to grow on their own. Outside, A drizzle began again, gentle and rhythmic. Naomi rested her hands on the steering wheel and whispered softly to herself, "One moment. One stand. That's all it takes." Her reflection in the windshield looked calm, resolute. The image of a woman who had turned humiliation into hope and silence into solidarity. As she drove through the quiet streets, her mind echoed with a truth she wished the world would carry forward. Respect isn't earned by status. It's practiced through compassion. Every time we choose understanding over arrogance, we heal something in this world. She turned onto the main road, the hospital's lights fading behind her as dawn approached on the horizon. And though the story that began in a grocery store had ended, its lesson lived on. In every conversation, every heart, every quiet act of courage that followed. If you believe one person's grace can challenge an entire system, if you believe kindness is strength and equality is not a privilege but a promise, share this story. Let it reach someone who needs to hear it. And if you stand for justice, dignity, and the courage to stay calm when the world tests your worth, hit subscribe and carry this truth forward.